There's an issue in landscaping and lawn care today of commoditization, where many buyers think that the suppliers are interchangeable, that they're basically all the same. And when a buyer has that perception, they default to the only tangible thing they can use to make a decision, and that's the price.
My name is John Giacotto, and I'm your host. We've got Duane Cashin here with us today. Duane is the founder of Cashin Sales and provides sales training specifically to the lawn care, landscaping, and pest control industries. He is a frequent speaker at the National Association of Landscape Professionals Elevate Conference and provides sales training to companies throughout the U.S. Duane, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, John.
Yeah. So, you have a long history in the sales industry. You take a detour to create a printing business before selling that and starting your current sales training company. Can you kind of just give me a little bit of background on how you came down to niche into sales training for the landscaping and pest control industries?
Yeah, I was contacted, probably about 7 years ago by NPMA, the National Pest Management Association. And they asked me if I'd like to speak on sales and sales management at their San Diego conference. And I said, pest control. Huh. Okay, why not? Never in a million years did I ever think about pest control, landscaping, lawn care. And I went and spoke, and I did I think 3 or 4 different sessions, and I was absolutely amazed at the number of people that were at that conference. I mean, there were thousands of people there. In years past, when I had gone to other conferences, there weren't anywhere near as many. So that struck me right away. And then the participants in the class were really engaged. I mean, lots of excellent questions. They were taking notes. And I said, wow, these people really came here to learn. They're really serious. So all of a sudden, I really started liking this group. And then a gentleman came up to me and said, hey, I want to talk to you. And that was Brad Leahy, actually, who was the VP and one of the owners of Blades of Green in Maryland. And they're also in pest control and lawn care. And so I talked with him and ended up doing a 6-month consulting assignment with him. I absolutely fell in love with the services and the industry, and that's what kicked it off.
Great. So during this interview, I want to kind of focus on the smaller guys, the ones making, let's say, $100,000 to $1 million a year in revenue. They're typically the owner operator type business, maybe one or more crews. They're often doing the sales themselves, I think, at this level, at least in my experience. So I want to talk about, which part of the sales process do you find most of those smaller landscaping and lawn care businesses are weakest in? Do you have something where you can kind of pinpoint and say, yeah, this is a common thing where I see weakness?
Well, I think it's important to lay down some groundwork. There's something that will come into play in really any question that you ask regarding selling, professional selling. I'm talking about professional selling, not just selling. Selling is one of the easiest professions to get into. All you need is some product knowledge, you need a business card, and you get on the phone, you go out there and you start telling people what you got, and you try to close deals. Professional selling is dramatically different. So whether it's a very small organization that's doing $100,000 a year and the owner is selling, trying to build this business, or whether they have 10 salespeople, there's a couple principles that remain in play. And one of them is selling is a process. There's 6 distinct stages in selling, landscaping. There's discovery, where we learn about the person we're talking to, the potential buyer. We learn what their preferences are and what they want to achieve. Then we go into presenting. Then we're trial closing. We're asking, how does that sound? What do you think of that? Is that what you had in mind? Then we go into handling objections, then closing, and then follow-up. And every single one of those phases has very specific strategies and tactics. So if you've got an owner that's out there selling, if that owner wants to really learn about sales, they're going to have to pay attention to these 6 different phases. And I really think they should, because their goal obviously is to grow the revenue so they can hire a salesperson. And then when they do hire a salesperson, they'll be most successful if they onboard them properly and teach them these 6 phases.
Gotcha.
We don't,
So
we don't, we don't want salespeople winging it. That's not professional. And that by and large is what's going on out there.
right, I would say most people at that kind of, I would say most landscapers and lawn care professionals I've worked with, they're winging the sales process. When I listen to kind of recorded calls for like the marketing stuff that we do, it's very much kind of winging that process. Um, is there, of those 6 stages, is there kind of one that's more important than the other? Is discovery more important than kind of gauging interest and testing how ready somebody is to close? Is there a section you would focus? How does somebody go from kind of having no sales process to developing a sales process if they don't have tons of time to work on their business because they're kind of working in there? Are there low hanging fruit that our listeners who are on the smaller side can actually do that will help them improve their sales process, not necessarily make them the best salesperson on earth, but at least incrementally help them improve?
It's a good question. The number one most impactful phase in the 6 is the discovery, because that's where we're learning about the buyer. And we need to understand the buyer's motivation. We need to understand what it is they want to achieve, because every step after that is going to rely on that information.
Gotcha. Okay.
When you present, we don't want to do a feature dump just saying this is how long we've been in business, this is how many customers we have, all that stuff, which people don't care about. I'm not saying it's not important, and maybe at some point in the conversation, they're going to want to know that. But when you're initially in the beginning of the sales process, people don't care about that. So the questions are key, and then we're going to present to what's important. And then when they give us an objection, we're going to reach back into what they told us is important, and we're going to demonstrate how we can help them get what they want. And I want to say one thing. You said, is there a shortcut we can take? I don't think you use that word, but I think fundamentally that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
These people don't have a lot of time. What should they go to kind of get some traction? And that's kind of like saying, hey, a fireman's going to go and work on, the building is burning down. Hey, is there kind of a shortcut that we can just give that fireman so they can go in there and get that fire out? That surgeon that's going in to do an operation, is there like a shortcut we can give them to get on that operation? Here's the deal, man. Selling generates, the world revolves around selling. You take all the salespeople out of the world and you're not going to have anything going on. Everything, I don't care what industry it is, selling is critical. And to be winging it is not appropriate. You want to be an accountant, you've got to get certified. You want to be a technician. You want to put down some fertilizer and weed control and that sort of thing. You've got to go to class and you've got to get certified to provide those materials. You want to be a doctor, you've got to get board certified. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Why shouldn't salespeople be any different? There's 6 steps. They all have strategies. They all have tactics. Sales is the engine that drives the company. Why should any sales rep not be studying? And the beauty about this is this stuff is not rocket science.
Can we go
The
through
6
maybe
phases are not rocket science. Anybody that wants to study it can learn it. There's no excuse, John, basically, in my mind.
Gotcha. Okay. Because I think sales for a lot of business owners, regardless of whether it's landscapers or lawn care professionals or any really contractor or any type of business, even lawyers, it's an afterthought, right? It's something where everyone does sales who has a business, but very few, I think a very small percentage, and you probably know the stats better than I do, really invest in their sales process, invest in kind of learning about sales. They're more comfortable working in the business than kind of on the sales side, and much more comfortable, learning about techniques for lawnmowers or for doing certain landscaping jobs than they are with figuring out how do you do discovery, or how do you actually close, or how do you kind of communicate or mirror kind of what somebody else is, how somebody else is acting. So you kind of develop that rapport. So maybe, because a lot of my questions, frankly, were geared around how do you, what are those little gold nuggets? What are those tactics? Why don't we really use this to delve into maybe at a high level what each of those pieces, each of those 6 phases are, right? Starting with discovery and maybe just
Yeah.
do a little overview of each one and talk through that. And then maybe at the end talk about, how people can kind of go more in depth into all these 6 phases. And I assume, every kind of sales model, sales methodology, has very similar elements, right? Every sales methodology talks about how you take people through some kind of process, right? So, so maybe we could talk through, both how does, what are these 6 phases, and maybe talk a little more about how can somebody learn more about these 6 phases, or are these 6 phases unique to really your sales methodology, or do they kind of apply across the board to and kind of, is it kind of just how sales is done in general? These high level phases are how anyone would do sales professionally.
Yeah, the phases have been around since the beginning of time. Any sales book you pick up is going to talk about them. They may call them different things.
Okay, so let's start with discovery. Tell me a little about that and how somebody can do a better job of, instead of just walking around with a homeowner saying, what are you looking for? How can they do a better job of discovery?
Okay, so first of all, I need to understand, are we talking commercial or are we talking residential? Are
Let's
we
start with
talking,
residential.
you want to start with
Yeah,
residential? Are
yeah.
we talking design build or are we talking about maintenance?
Let's talk about design build, the higher ticket items.
Okay, so design build, an individual is either motivated by, they want to beautify their property in some way. Perhaps it's a retaining, a patio, could be a wall around a garden. There could be issues with the retaining wall. Perhaps there is erosion. Maybe the motivation is there's a problem versus I just want to beautify the area. In discovery, the sales representative has to find out what's motivating this individual to consider purchasing. So they have to ask questions to identify exactly what their motivation is. They need to find out why now? What's motivating you at this point in time to want to do this design build? Have you considered this in the past? Have you talked with other people? Do you have other estimates? And all these questions are sprinkled throughout a conversation. We don't want to interrogate someone by just going down a list of questions. We want to engage in a conversation with them to find out what their objectives are and what their plans are. We want to find out in discovery if they have a particular budget in mind and how they arrived at that budget. Are they
So
that
let me
number?
ask you really quickly on budget. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on some ways to ask for budget? Because I think, oftentimes people when they're doing sales are not great at asking for budget, at least in my experience. Do you have some
Mhm.
ways of asking about budget that kind of, come across as smoother or not as invasive?
Yeah, let's talk about that word invasive for a second. This is business. And sales representatives have to understand that they need to respect themselves. They need to understand that they have a wealth of knowledge about landscaping and that they are in a position to help someone. And it can be an utter waste of time for any salesperson in landscaping not to discuss the budget. Because I would imagine with any project, there's a number of different ways that project can be approached. There's different quality of materials that can be used. There's a different a build approach. There's a time frame involved. What is a time frame this person has in mind? If they're saying that they've got an event coming up and they want this, whatever it is, done very, very quickly, Well, that landscaper may have to adjust their calendar, and there's going to be a price associated with that. So sales representatives need to be confident, and they need to understand their business people, first of all. When we talk about budget, we just want to be able to say, Mr. Jones, there's a number of different ways we can approach this project. And I'd like to understand, kind of specifically what you have in mind. And if you also have a particular budget in mind, because there's a number of ways we can go about that, and they all have a different price tag. So tell me a little bit about your budget. And if they give a number, they say, well, it's $5,000. Okay, perfect. Tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind, how you arrived at that. Are you looking at another estimate that you got? Are you using that number? Is that a hard and fast budget, meaning that's all the money you have allocated for this, period, end of story? I just want to understand that, Mr. Jones, so that when I deliver a proposal to you, I'm addressing your very specific needs. It's business.
Right.
I heard a gentleman do a podcast the other day, and he was asked a question, can you train anybody to be a salesperson? And this is a guy in the industry, actually pest control industry. And he said, yeah, basically, if they're intelligent and they're articulate and they want to learn and they enjoy people, yeah, we can, through training, we can teach them to be a great salesperson. That is absolutely 100% not true. See, this is another interesting thing about selling. Not everybody is mentally wired to be able to be a salesperson. And this issue of not being able to discuss budget, as you said, is legendary. It's as common as table salt. And it comes from an insecurity. If someone was raised like I was in a very low income family where money was always an issue, you're going to have a hard time out there as a salesperson wrapping your head around a $5,000, $10,000 deal, because you're going to be selling with your own wallet and the way your mind is wired. And asking budget, this idea of it's invasive and it's intrusive, well, that's more belief. And if a representative has a bunch of these kind of beliefs, they're not going to be effective in selling.
Makes sense. So is there more to discovery that you would want to talk about, or should we go on to the next
No, I
case?
mean, the essence in discovery is to ask a boatload of questions to find out what is their motivation, what is the time frame, how are they going to go about making a decision, where are they in their research process, have they talked to several other providers, do they have other estimates, how have they gone about their estimate? The rep needs to ask a lot of questions in a conversational way, so it's not an interrogation, to understand exactly what's going on.
Right.
So that's discovery. And then armed with that information, a representative can then move forward and begin to present ideas in a very, very targeted way. One of the number one problems with presenting is representatives doing a feature dump, which is where they tell the buyer, this is how long we've been in business, this is how many technicians we have, here's how many jobs we've done, and they go on and on and on. With the idea, the motivation, the representative is motivated to impress the buyer with these features. These are features. And buyers today are too savvy. Their attention span is so short. They're so distracted that when you launch as a rep on that feature dump, they check out. Very quickly, they check out. Mm-hmm. So the presentation, it has to be only focused on what's important to them and what they want to achieve. And of course, that's why discovery is the foundation upon which everything is built, because that rep needs to uncover exactly what this person wants, their preferences, and then they can present to that. And the presentation doesn't have to be long. A lot of reps think there's got to be a lot of volume of information. That's not accurate. And in the presentation, there's trial closing. How does that sound, Mr. Jones? What do you think of that approach I just described for you?
So basically gauging their interest and how ready they are to move forward with what you've suggested.
100%.
And what
So
happens when you
discovery,
go ahead?
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what happens when you encounter resistance? When you encounter, does that mean you just didn't do a good enough job with the presentation, or what do you do at that point? If
Well,
as you ask these, you're getting negative responses to those trial closing questions.
when we ask a buyer for their opinion, that's not usually when we get objections. We get objections when we ask them for a commitment. Do you want to go ahead with this, Mr. Jones? That's a commitment. That's when you get the objections. But when we're asking, how does that sound, Mr. Jones, that approach to putting this wall in for you? How does that sound to you? Oh, that's kind of what I had in mind. Yeah. And then he'll have a few more questions and, hey, Mr. Jones, regarding the structure that we're talking about here, this gazebo that, that you're thinking about with the landscaping around it. How do you feel about the plants I've suggested? That's asking someone's opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the answers to those questions indicate a buyer's desire and their motivation, and we're in the process of qualifying as well.
Right. Okay.
And then if they say, yeah, I like the approach, it sounds really good. Well, now we're going to go, into a closing mode. You want me to go ahead and get the paperwork put together? Would you like to move forward with this? How would you like to pay for this? That's when we get objections, and then the rep needs to be prepared to handle objections.
So what happens though if somebody's not able to give a proposal, a quote right then? Do you split this 6 phases into multiple meetings, or do you always try to, no matter what, get a commitment on that? Do you always try to close on that initial meeting?
No, with landscaping, oftentimes the representative has to go back to the office after that meeting and sit down and put together a presentation, a proposal, check the price of materials, check labor, talk with operations perhaps and see what they get, anything they need answered from them, and then return. So the rep would, after discovery, would do qualification, and then they would schedule a very specific day and time to come back to deliver that proposal.
But never just leave it in the mail, never just email it over, always come back in person as long as the ticket value is high enough.
Well, that's another, you've hit on another big problem in the industry. And that is, I've got a client right now where this is a topic that we're discussing. The representatives have gotten into the habit of emailing over the proposals. And when you do that, you've completely relinquished any control you have over the process, which is not what we want to do. And sales representatives, frankly, have trained buyers in landscaping to expect that the proposal will be emailed to them. Why? Because the reps agree to do it. And they've commoditized themselves. There's an issue in landscaping and lawn care today of commoditization, where many buyers think that the suppliers are interchangeable, that they're basically all the same. And when a buyer has that perception, they default to the only tangible thing they can use to make a decision, and that's the price. So we have to be somewhat disruptive, and the sales representatives have to have the courage and the confidence to say, Mr. Jones, Mr. Jones says, yeah, email it over to me. That'll be great. Mr. Jones, that isn't how at our company, how we serve our customers. I'm going to prepare several different options for you, and I'm going to meet with you to describe it, because you're going to have a few questions, and I want to make sure that I answer your questions so you know exactly what it is you're getting, and we're clear. And the sales representative has to sell that. That's a sale, selling the in-person proposal delivery.
And what you're basically saying then is, Mr. Buyer, we're going to use my process, not your process, right? And you're saying we're going to do this the way I kind of am laying out the process, rather than defaulting to the way maybe 80% of the industry does the process.
That's exactly correct. Of course, we won't say that, but that's exactly what's going on. And there's great value in the buyer to meet with the rep face to face, by the way, because they get to ask their questions. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with companies in landscaping where they've said, you know what, Duane, we got a problem with customers because they don't even read the contract. And then they call us a few months down the road and they say, you said you were going to mow that piece of land I have right over there. Your guys aren't doing it. They don't even walk out there. Well, you know what, Mr. Jones, that is not what we said. And in fact, that's not in the agreement. And Mr. Jones didn't even read the agreement. And apparently that's very common in the industry, especially on the commercial side.
Right. So we had,
So,
go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead. I was just gonna say, there's a benefit to the buyer to meet with the rep because the buyer gets clarity. And they ensure that they're going to get what they want, and that's really important.
Right. So we've had discovery, we've had the presentation, which had some trial closes. Then we had the actual close. What's after that? Because at the close, are you trying to then, and that could be split up into two different meetings, right? So you do the presentation, I mean, the discovery, the presentation, and then you're basically going back to your office, doing a bunch of legwork, and then coming back for a second meeting and trying to close them. But what's after that? It seems like that's just three steps, right? Three stages.
Yeah, well, usually there's a follow-up. It's very common for the representative to get some objections. You're going to have to handle the objections. I want to think it over.
Mhm.
Is one. I'm going to get some other estimates. I've got to talk it over with so and so. And your price is kind of high.
So let me ask you a question. So I have to speak with my wife, brother, sister, whatever about
Yeah.
it. Should you, when you meet with somebody, make sure that you're meeting with all the decision makers, or not really worry about that and handle that objection after the fact?
Yeah, that's a good question. In discovery, that's another element, is to understand what their decision-making process is going to be and who is involved in it. And whenever possible, as you said, yes, we want to say, when I return with the proposal, it would be most beneficial for you to have all the individuals that are going to be involved in this, the other stakeholders, if it's commercial, if it's residential, the partner. Yeah, we attempt to do that.
Would
Yep.
you, if you can do the job, and I mean, if you don't need to go back to your office to do a proposal, right? If it's a smaller project, and you've identified there are additional decision makers, would you say, I'm going to come back to do the proposal, or would you just not worry about that piece and try to have all the decision makers there? Like, how would you approach that?
If the sales representative if this is a smaller job where it's generic in nature and they have the ability to provide a price right then and there, is that what you're saying basically?
Yeah, they could, but they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have all the decision makers. The wife isn't there, the husband is, but
Yeah, they should move forward and try to close that sale. Absolutely.
right. Okay.
Yep, to uncover the objections and see what the response is. See, a lot of times when someone says, I've got to talk it over with so-and-so, it's a smoke screen. It's not really an objection. It's not the real objection.
So how do you get to what the real objection is, or determine if an objection is real?
Well, if somebody, let's take the spouse, the partner thing for a moment, okay? I got to talk it over with my partner. Here's what we want to ask. First of all, we always show empathy anytime someone gives us an objection. Show that we understand, take any pressure out of the conversation. That's fine, Mr. Jones. I appreciate that. My relationship, we work that way as well. Let me ask you something. May I ask what's your wife's name? We'll assume it's a man and a woman. You're talking with a man and he's got to talk it over with his wife. What's your wife's name? Oh, it's Mary. Okay, great. So let me ask you something. If you were going to make a decision right now, Mr. Jones, based on our conversation, based on the packaging and the pricing that we've talked about, would you move forward with this? We need to find out if he is on board and if he would move forward with this. This is all part of smoking out if there is really a Mary and if this really has to happen.
Right.
We want to find out if he were going to make a decision right now, would he move forward with this program, this offer? That's going to begin, and then the rep has got to be quiet and really listen, because that's going to begin smoking out exactly what's going on. Well, I mean, it can go a couple ways. Well, yeah, I really like what you said. All right. So let me ask you, when you bring this to Mary, you describe the project and the pricing. What do you think her reaction will be? We don't want to ask what do you think she'll say. We want to find out what will her reaction be. Words in selling are very, very important. When we ask what's your reaction, he sees in his mind her face and how she is going to react. And we want to know what that reaction is going to be. Well, I think she'll be fine with it. All right, you think the way we go about it, the time frame, the investment, you think she'll be in agreement with that? Yeah, I do. Okay. Or, well, I'm not sure. It's going to be hard to get a hold of her. Those kind of responses now indicates that this is not a real objection. Or, yeah, I think she's going to have a problem with the pricing. Okay, I can appreciate that. It's challenging economy right now. We've got an election year coming up. There's a lot of uncertainty going on. I respect that. Let me ask you something, and now you're going to go back to what you talked about in discovery. He has other proposals, perhaps. You found this out earlier. He does not have any other proposals. You're the first one. And then you have to move forward and ask questions around that. When do you think you're going to get your other estimates? You may want to revisit just if we can, let's revisit the budget, how you went about coming up with that. And you're going to have a conversation around it where you continue really what is a discovery again.
Right.
To uncover exactly what's going on.
Right. So you mentioned kind of affirming everything the buyer is saying. How important is that? It seems like you're trying to develop this rapport. Is that part of the way you develop rapport? And are there other ways you should be developing rapport as part of this process? And how important is rapport building as part of the sales process?
It's extremely important because a sales representative has to develop credibility, establish credibility with this buyer. They also have to work toward establishing trust, because when someone trusts us, we know they'll buy from us. If they don't trust us, they're not going to buy from us. So rapport is very important. We take into consideration their personality style. If they're an analytic, we need to give them numbers and percentages because that's what they need. That's how their head works. If they're an expressive, we don't want to give them a lot of numbers and percentages because they're going to get bored very, very quickly and check out. They're people that like to tell stories and they're very gregarious, and that's not numbers and percentages.
So it sounds like very early on in the discovery process, you want to understand what type of personality they have and try to match that to a degree with your approach. Is that
100%? Yeah, because every personality accepts information in a certain way. And we want to understand how will they absorb and accept information, because that's the way I want to give that to them. And then as you said in discovery, you identify that. And then every conversation that you have after that, you follow their personality style. And this is someone listening to this would just say, oh my God, this is so much information. What, are you kidding me? It's not complicated. It's just a lot of info at first. If they just start working on it piece by piece, making a commitment over the next 12 months to really absorb this, they can learn this. It's not rocket science.
right? And with so many people kind of focused on how do I get more leads for my business, if you can just close more, that's a huge portion of the battle.
Absolutely. If you think about, like a lawn care company, for example, they're spending a lot of money on pay-per-click and vehicle wraps and yard signs and maybe some advertising and print advertising, maybe on the radio. Every time that phone rings, there's a dollar amount associated with that inbound call. And usually it's 50, 60, 70, 100, $150. I mean, think about that for a minute. That phone rings and it costs you $100 to get that call. that rep really needs to drain every ounce of opportunity out of that opportunity. And they need to understand strategy and tactics in order to do it.
Right. So are those the elements, or are there other phases of the sales process that we should go over besides like handling the objections, the closing, the
Yeah,
trial
I mean,
closes?
another big one is the follow-up, especially in a design build, they're probably not going to be able to close it right there because they're going to have to get the estimate constructed,
Mhm.
go back to the office and figure that out. And then they're going to have to go back. And when someone says, hey, I'm going to get a couple other estimates, and the rep discusses that with them, and the buyer sticks to that, I am going to get, you're the first one I talk to, I'm going to go get, at least one other estimate. Okay, then the rep's got to identify, when are you going to get it? I'd like to schedule a time to return, answer any questions that you have. The follow-up is critical because the representative has to continue to build credibility. What is very common and is 100% ineffective is for a rep to be calling, leaving voicemails, sending emails, texts. I just wanted to check in with you. Haven't heard back from you. Hope everything's going great. Let me know if you want to talk. Thanks a lot. Hey, just wondering if you made a decision yet, Mr. Jones, just wondered, did you get your other estimate? Is there something we can talk about? That is highly ineffective, and people don't have the attention span for that kind of stuff today.
But that's the most
So
common
what do we-
follow-up, right? It's
That's
I want
the
to
most
check.
common
Right. I
for
want to check in.
untrained
Yeah.
for untrained salespeople. That's the most common. But for
So-
sales professionals, what they do is they go back to the information that they got in discovery. The fact that this man is now getting close to retirement and he wants to have a beautiful backyard because he's going to be enjoying his backyard, and he has a dog that he likes to throw the ball with, and they have friends over and they barbecue, right? This is what the rep learned in discovery. Well, now the rep is going to leverage this information when they follow up. So instead of leaving a voicemail that says, hey, did you make a decision? The rep is going to say, hey, it's Bill. I was just thinking of you today, Mr. Jones, about how excited you must be about getting ready to be retired. And I think what you want to do in your backyard is really interesting. I think you and your family will really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. If you know when you do want to talk, if you let me know that would be wonderful. It pulls the person in. Because it's all about them. The number one thing any human being in any country, nationality wants to talk about is themselves.
Right.
This is a fundamental. People want to talk about themselves, their ideas, their wishes, their desires. So when we're following up, if we're referring back to what they told us about themselves, we're pulling them into listening to that voicemail or reading that email. They're feeling like, wow, this guy really listened to me. Well, this guy is very professional in how he's going about this. I like this guy. And now, even though the rep isn't with them face to face, they're continuing to develop the relationship and build trust and credibility. And every single touch should have an element that goes back to what they learned in discovery. Then you're building momentum, and the rep is differentiating themselves and standing out in an industry which right now is largely being commoditized.
Right. And I would say probably a lot of landscaping business owners are really not probably following up. Send over the proposal and it either, they either hear back or don't hear back.
And
Do
this
you find
isn't
that as
their
well?
fault, by the way. 100%. Excuse me. 100%. This is not their fault, John. You said this earlier. These individuals are very production oriented. The materials, how to do a design build, a plant, different types of plants, and how they react to seasonality and the water, and if they're putting material down, how much fertilizer to put down so we don't burn this grass. They're very production and technically oriented. That's the way their heads are wired. They started the business because they're passionate about those elements. And because of that, many of them are not realizing how important the sales side of the business is.
Right. So what can a business owner do to kind of get better at sales? Do they um, just buy a book on sales? Do they go find some training somewhere? What would be your recommendation for the average landscaping lawn care business owner who's on the smaller side? What should they do to get better at sales?
Yeah, any of that. They need an education. They need to study it. And they need to make a long-term commitment to studying it because they're not going to read a book and it's not going to be done. They're going to have to make a year-long commitment to understanding this is vital to their success. And they're going to study and they're going to learn,
Right.
whether it's going to classes, whether it's going on taking an online course, whether it's reading books. Yeah, they need to find good information about the sales process and they need to study. And they need to start with discovery. You know, you said, what should they start with? They should start with discovery and improve their ability to question. So if somebody listening to this, they want to know, what should I do tomorrow? Start asking better questions, really uncover their motivation, what their desires are, how did they arrive at the budget? What is that budget number? You know, start working on that to understand.
Right. Okay. And before we go, I want to ask you as well, do you have any advice on how to get more referrals? Um, Both more referrals as well as how to maximize the customer lifetime value. Because I think a lot of times once the sale is made, that's kind of considered the sales is done. But, there's a lot of ongoing, you know, every year additional work that can a lot of times be done. And I think, so let's start with how can somebody maximize the customer lifetime value from a sales perspective? What should they be doing to either stay top of mind or what should they be doing to kind of get referrals from those customers of theirs? Because I kind of view customer lifetime value as both what you get from that customer, but also what you get from the referrals they can kind of give
Mhm.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, these again, you're bringing up fundamentals, foundational uh, strategies and processes. The first thing, which is extremely obvious, we know it is just to do a wonderful job and to make sure that each and every customer is satisfied and that they're pleased with the outcome. And if they have any problems, that those problems are addressed very, very immediately and that they are resolved. And that the company is asking, do you have any other family members or anyone in your Rotary Club or that you golf with or any club you belong to? Do you know anyone that you think I might be able to introduce myself to? That's a process. Reaching out annually, a couple times a year to existing customers with a check-in. How are you doing? You happy? Is there anything we can help you with? And by the way, we've added a new service or wanting to see if there's something else we can help you with. That should be a standard process. Yeah, it takes an effort, and that's an area, frankly, that I'm working on in my own business. You get so busy that you forget about touching base with people,
Right.
and that's a mistake that I'm currently making in my business, and I'm trying to fix.
Right. Yeah, because I think a lot of times people struggle to get as many sales as they can, and then they kind of ignore trying to either get more referrals or maximize the
Yep,
customer. And it's so much easier to get more work from an existing customer than a lot of times it is to get a new customer in the door. So
absolutely, I agree.
yeah. So
I
how can
agree.
our listeners get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your sales training services?
Well, my website is cashinsales.com. Um, Last year I created an online course.
Hmm.
There's 5 modules in it that have roughly 7 lessons each. So there's 30 lessons. They're videos. They're short lessons. They're about 7 minutes long, and it focuses on everything that we're talking about. It's called the One Call Close Mastery.
Okay.
And I made that largely for the smaller companies because it's affordable. Whereas my consulting is often out of reach for the small company. So they may want to take a look at that course. I also have written a book. It's available on Amazon. They can grab that book. It's the One Call Close Mastery book. And then they can schedule an appointment with me on my website at cashinsales.com if they want to chat about stuff.
Okay, awesome. Duane, I can't thank you enough for coming on my podcast. It was very interesting learning about your perspectives on sales and for the landscaping industry and lawn care industry. And I think you gave us a lot of information to think about, a lot of gold nuggets to kind of come away with. And I hope our listeners the big takeaway will be, it's important to invest in your sales process, invest in kind of learning how to become a better salesperson, because it's just so fundamental to growth.
What's the engine?
Right.
It's
Exactly.
if you don't have any revenue coming in, you can't buy a new lawnmower. You don't need the equipment. You can't hire anybody. You don't need an accountant. You don't need if you don't have money, you can't do a darn thing. So it's absolutely critical. It's like having a race car in your garage, but there's but there's no gas in it. I mean, the engine isn't running. And the last thing I'll say is for everybody, start small. Just start with discovery. Just start on the path to learn. Don't try to absorb all this stuff and start using it all overnight. You're just going to be overwhelmed and not do anything at all. Start really, really small, but make a commitment to learn, realize how important it is, and just start down the road. And you'll be very, very happy, I promise you, on what could potentially happen to your business.
All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, Duane. I appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. All right.
Thank you.